Hello, this is Ron Williford at Studio 21. We're here today to Let's Talk Money. Our guest today is Jake Szulinski. Jake's a financial advisor, and we're here to talk today about the importance of planning your legacy. Jake, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thanks, Ron. I appreciate you having me today. Again, as you mentioned, I am a financial advisor with Edward Jones Investments here in Wayne. I do help clients, individuals, and families with a lot of different issues, from investing, retirement planning, as well as helping to plan their legacy, which I know today is a few things we're going to talk about.
Right. So what's the most important thing about planning your legacy? If you were to look at the total picture, where would you start to start planning?
Great question. It's actually right in the first couple of words you said in planning the legacy. It's having a plan, making sure that you are actually planning for something that's going to happen in the future. You know, none of us have the crystal ball or actually know what's going to happen. So making sure that we get our ducks in a row before things happen is the most important thing. So making sure that that plan is in place for when something happens is the most crucial thing.
Great. Now we're in the process of wrapping up the latest tax season. So if you were to look at any issues that someone should be concerned about as we close out and planning for the future, where should our heads be as far as planning your legacy?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of topics, especially during tax season, but throughout the whole year, that are extremely important. The first thing are required minimum distributions.
Okay.
That are a big topic. 529 plans, especially for somebody who is getting ready to plan their legacy. So somebody who is maybe over the age of 60 or 65, possibly a grandparent, setting up 529 plans for grandchildren or great-grandchildren. And then the last thing is beneficiaries, and making sure that you have everything in order in that facet, so that, again, when something happens or when a need arises, that you have a plan in place.
Okay, now you have mentioned 529s. To the general public, when you hear 529, we're thinking education, college planning.
Yep.
So where does that fit into creating a legacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're correct. 529 is for education planning. Where it comes into creating a legacy is grandparents, or parents for that matter, can actually contribute to a 529 for their kids or grandkids. How that helps is, of course, with the college education expenses in today's day and age are extremely high. So obviously it's helping the child or the grandchild pay for college in the future. But what it's also doing is helping the parent or grandparent leave a legacy. So hopefully they are around, but if they're not around anymore and they've put this money away into this education savings vehicle, that money is there for the child or grandchild down the road. To make sure that, again, they are leaving a legacy, through their family and to who they want to leave it to.
Now, as far as the education piece, what are the stipulations for the 529? Can you just put money in, take it out, go buy a red Corvette, or does it have to be used for certain specifications?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way a 529 is set up is you have an owner and a beneficiary.
Okay.
So the owner is usually, an adult, so a parent, a grandparent. It could be an aunt, uncle. It honestly could be anybody who wants to set one up. But for argument's sake, we'll say a parent or a grandparent is going to be the owner.
Okay.
The beneficiary of that account is going to be the child. So the child, the grandchild, whoever is going to be the beneficial, recipient of those funds. When that's set up, anybody can contribute into the 529, and when the money is taken out, it has to be used for qualified education expenses. Now that's where we get a little bit hairy, because the IRS doesn't really stipulate exactly what those education expenses are. They don't give line items, but we kind of have to use a little common sense. So tuition, room and board, supplies, books, things like that, it can be used for. If you say, I need a red Corvette for my son or daughter or grandchild to get to and from class, that's where we're pushing the envelope, and the IRS isn't going to be too happy about that. But using the 529 for qualified education expenses is what that account is set up for.
Now, what are the consequences if you don't use it for education? And can this be forwarded and passed to continuous generations?
Yeah, it's a great point. So yes, there are consequences if you don't use it. So in your example, if we go out and buy the red Corvette with the money that we put into a 529 plan, there are going to be penalties and taxes that go along with taking that money out and not using it for qualified education expenses. So some people may ask then, well, what happens if my son, daughter, grandchild doesn't go to college or doesn't need the money for college? What happens then? just to what you alluded to, you can transfer it to other people in your family. Okay. So it has to stay in your linear family. So whether you have another child or whether you want to go another generation down and go to a grandchild, the beneficiary can be switched to one of those different people with no consequences at all. So you still get the full capabilities of the 529 and switching the beneficiary to somebody who actually needs the money for the college education.
Okay, now what kind of investments can be used for the 529?
Yeah, so in a 529, most of them are done through investment companies. Okay. So you're going to have mutual funds. Is going to be mutual funds and ETFs, exchange traded funds, are going to be the main type of investments that you're allowed to use underneath the 529 umbrella.
Okay, now is it state specific, or
yeah,
what are the advantages, disadvantages of the 529?
Yeah, so the advantages of the 529, we'll start there, is when you put money in, you actually in Pennsylvania get a state tax deduction for putting money into a 529. I do want to let you know that I am a financial advisor, so I'm not an accountant or an attorney. So you do have to consult with your accountant or your attorney for your specific situation to get the exact amounts that you're allowed to deduct and how to do that. But you are eligible for a possible state tax deduction when you put money into a 529.
Okay.
All the money that goes in is hopefully going to grow over time. So you have typically 18 years until a child will reach college age. So over those 18 years, we're hoping that the account is going to grow. And all that growth is going to be tax-free. You don't have to pay a dime of tax on any of that money as long as it's used for qualified education expenses. So those are the pros. The cons are it has to be used for education expenses. So like you said, if somebody actually wants to buy, we'll do a more realistic example, just a regular car or a, maybe the red Corvette's nice, but just some children do need a car to get to and from class or commute from home or whatever it may be. Right. But a car or maybe a down payment on a house a parent wants to help a child with later on. Unfortunately, the 529 is not the vehicle for that. It's not going to allow you to use those funds to do that. If you do, you are going to have those taxes and penalties. Okay. So those are the disadvantages of the 529. Now, you did mention about being state-specific or something like that. So there are a lot of states out there that have state-specific plans, meaning that if you live in the state, you have to use the state-specific plan. Pennsylvania is not one of those states. Pennsylvania, you can actually use any state's plan and still get a Pennsylvania state tax deduction. Okay. Other states, they do make you use their own state-specific plan. The good thing about Pennsylvania is we just don't fall into that category. The way it's set up right now, we can use any different state and still have the benefits of the 529.
Okay, now with the cost of education, let's say you put away all this money and you get to the point where you're getting ready to go to college, and this account just isn't enough to get you through. How will this impact your financial aid package?
Yeah, another great question. So financial aid isn't necessarily impacted from the 529 as a product. It's impacted on who is the owner of the 529. So when we look at FAFSA, the federal financial aid or something like that, what they're going to look at is how much money is in the parent's name and in the child's name. And there's a formula that they look at to say, does this person actually need financial aid? Right. So the more money that you have in the child's name, the worse off you are. So if there's a ton of money in the child's name, that's going to go against them for financial aid because the institution's going to say, well, this child has money. They can pay for their tuition. Same thing with the parent. If they're going to look at the assets of the parent. Now, it doesn't count as much against you as the child, but having a bunch of assets in the parent's name is still going to count against you for financial aid purposes. Okay. So we go back to leaving a legacy. The best way to actually set it up from that standpoint is having a grandparent as the owner. The reason is no institution is going to go beyond the parent or the grandchild, or excuse me, the parent or the child, to look at their assets. So they're not going to say, give me grandma and grandpa's list of assets. I want to see them for financial aid purposes. They're not allowed to do that. So when you set up a 529 in a grandparent's name, it actually gives you a decent benefit there for financial aid purposes that they're not going to see it. Okay,
now let's say, can the 529 be set up, be owned by a trust? Does that make a difference?
Nope, it's got to be an individual owner. Okay. So yeah, you have to have an individual person who's the owner on the account.
All right, great. Now, you had also mentioned RMDs, which in this industry we know is required minimum distributions.
Correct.
At what age does someone have to start pulling that money out from their retirement accounts?
Yeah, so required minimum distributions are specifically mandated by the IRS out of certain retirement accounts.
Okay.
And it is a good way to leave a legacy for multiple reasons. They can leave that money to their heirs, so they can start gifting money away possibly, or they can use that money to maybe contribute to a 529 plan,
Okay.
or they can actually gift it to charity as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a combination of being able to leave a legacy a couple of different ways by using a required minimum distribution. The required minimum distribution, or RMD, actually starts at age 70 and a half. So
Okay.
once you turn age 70 and a half, that's when the IRS says we have to start looking at this and we have to start taking money out of certain retirement accounts.
Now, what if you're still working and you're in a 401k? Do you still have to take money out of that 401k that's active, or does it have to be only accounts that you're not contributing
Yeah,
to?
so if you have a 401k and you're actively employed and still working there, most of the time you do not have to take a distribution out of those for the RMD. It's usually going to be just the assets that are outside of the 401k. Now, if you have an old 401k that you're not working anymore, that is going to be included in the calculation. That is going to have to be included in taking money out of that.
Okay, so in other words, anything that's active, the money doesn't have to come out of.
Correct. As long as you're still fully employed and the company plan that you're active under, you don't have to take RMDs from that.
Okay.
But outside of that, you will.
Now, clients are receiving or people are receiving these distribution. What's the most efficient way to get some relief from that additional income?
Yeah, so from a tax standpoint, again, you need to consult the accountant about your specific exact situation. But there are tax rules that are in place now that if you take that required minimum distribution and gift it directly to charity, you don't have to pay a dime of tax on any of it. If you start talking about giving it to heirs or leaving it for somebody else in your family, you're going to have to look at not only you paying income tax, but also gift tax. So again, it's definitely a good strategy to sit down with not only a financial professional like you or me, but also to bring in the accountant and loop them in to make sure that we're covering all of our bases and not causing some adverse tax situation for a client.
Okay, now you have mentioned a charity. Does that charity have to be a 501(c)(3)? Does it be a regulated IRS charity? Or
Yes,
can it be
it does. Yeah, it
my
can't
bank
be,
account that I set up
correct,
as a
yeah.
charity that
it can't be just it can't just be a nonprofit that is set up by somebody or an individual. It does have to be a federally recognized charity.
Because quote unquote, we got the saying that says the charity starts at home. So you got to watch that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a great point. Yes.
So when we look at this RMD or the retirement, required minimum distribution, I know a lot of folks, there's an influx of cash that comes into their income tax report.
Right.
Plus Social Security becomes taxable.
Sure.
Is there any other than gifting the money, any other way that they can overcome this? I have a lot of seniors that will receive this money. They don't need it.
Right.
But all of a sudden they got a headache with the IRS.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's, again, what the IRS is really trying to do here is that's their whole point, is they want the money out of that account so the IRS can tax it. So they don't give you many loopholes to say, let's make it non-taxable. Unfortunately, you're going to have to pay the tax on it and you're going to have to do it. And I am in the same situation where I have clients that come in and say, Jake, I don't really necessarily need the RMD. I'm not going to take it this year. Right. And that's when we have to tell them about, what happens when you don't take an RMD.
What are the penalties?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a 50% penalty. So
wow.
It's a 50. So 50% penalty from the IRS if you don't take it. So
is it 50% of your account balance or 50% of what you should have taken out?
Correct. 50% of the RMD of what you needed to take out.
That's a heavy hit.
Exactly. Hypothetically, it's a $10,000 required minimum distribution. The IRS can actually penalize you 50% of that, so $5,000.
Wow.
Plus, they still make you take out the $10,000, so it's taxable, and you have to pay income tax on that.
So wait a minute, you pay the penalty,
and you still have to take out.
Still have to take out.
Correct.
The required minimum distribution.
Correct. So it is a very, very serious issue. You want to make sure that you're planning for this, that you understand what the consequences are, and that you are taking it. Because if you don't take it, it comes along with some hefty penalties.
Now, what determines the required minimum distribution?
Yeah. So the IRS actually has a table of a formula that puts your number into that along with your age. So again, we said it starts at 70 and a half. And what they do is they take your account balance from December 31st of the previous year. So right now we're in 2019. So if you have to take an RMD in 2019, they'll look at December 31st, 2018, and look at your account balance of the retirement account. you're 70 and a half this year. So you go to the IRS table, look at that, put the formula of what your balance was on December 31st, and that's going to be how you calculate the RMD.
Okay.
Now, for the first year, it's about 3.6% of your account value, and it's going to increase every year as you get older and older.
Okay.
Most institutions will automatically do this for you. So wherever you're holding your retirement account, whether it be Edward Jones or another financial institution, they will automatically calculate it for you and let you know what you need to take out for that year.
Now, is there any specific date? Does it have to be before April 15th, before the end of the year?
Yeah.
When does it have to be taken out?
January 1st to December 31st. So you have the
Okay.
full calendar year to take it out. The IRS only cares about really getting their taxes off of it.
Okay.
So as long as you take it out in the calendar year, it's going to be taxable for that calendar year. So
Now-
you don't have any constraints besides that.
Now, also, what if you inherited an IRA?
Yep.
Do the same rules apply? Or
Yeah.
do you just get hit with taxes for receiving that IRA?
Right now, in general, the same rules apply, but the calculation's a little bit different.
Okay.
So if a person is over 70 and a half, and they're taking a required minimum distribution every year, and then, God forbid, something happened and they're no longer around, and they put, a beneficiary on that account. Now the beneficiary is going to inherit that IRA. The beneficiary can keep that IRA, and it's going to be named an inherited IRA.
Okay.
But there's going to be RMDs, but it's calculated off of now their lifetime, not the original owner's lifetime. So the premise is the same. The calculation's a little bit different on how they do it, but they will have to continue taking required minimum distributions, even if they are under 70 and a half. Because the original owner was over 70 and a half, they have to take required minimum distributions.
Now, if let's say I'm going in and I'm setting up a retirement account, I'm setting up a 401k, does it make sense to name a child as a beneficiary, or how?
Yeah, it could, absolutely. I mean, that's going to depend on your situation and who you want to leave the money to. You could leave it to a child. If a child is under 18 years old, usually a guardian or custodian is going to be
Okay.
assigned to the account to help them with the account until they become the age of majority, which in Pennsylvania is age 18.
Okay.
So you can leave it to a child. It is at 18 going to be their money. So we go back to that red Corvette. You never know if that money's going to be withdrawn for the red Corvette. But yes, you are able to do that and leave it to the child, and the child will benefit from having it.
Okay, now let's say I have a 401k, I have these retirement accounts, and I don't have a beneficiary. What happens?
Yeah, that's a big issue. So when you have a beneficiary, a live actual person, the person can make the decision on taking that IRA and stretching it out over time.
Okay.
So taking required minimum distributions every year, paying tax on just the distribution. When you don't have a beneficiary on it, what happens is it goes to your estate. And what happens is it comes out of its retirement classification and gets paid to the estate, and then the estate has to pay the full tax on the lump sum of what's in there. So we usually do not recommend putting nobody on as a beneficiary. We strongly recommend putting an individual on there or multiple individuals on there as a beneficiary. The tax burden to the estate is very large when there's nobody on there.
So when someone says, I'm going to name my estate, it doesn't make sense to do that.
Most of the time it does not make sense. There's very few circumstances where it could make sense, and again, wrapping in with the attorney or the accountant, there's a specific strategy in place for that. But I'd say 99% of the time we'd like to see an individual on those accounts or multiple individuals on the account as a beneficiary.
Really makes sense.
Yeah.
And with the retirement account and also the 529, is that considered a part of your estate? Is there inheritance tax that's involved?
Yeah,
if you were to die?
That's a great question. So yes, in Pennsylvania, we have a state inheritance tax, and there's also a federal inheritance tax.
Okay.
So everything that you own when you pass away is included in your estate. So cars, house, retirement accounts, bank accounts, everything is included in your estate. Now, when we look at the federal estate tax, you have to have over $11 million per person to be included in the federal estate tax. So not many people are included in that. And when you have spouses, you have $11 million times 2. So $22 million.
Okay.
So a lot of people are not going to qualify for that. So we don't usually worry about federal inheritance tax. State inheritance tax for the state of Pennsylvania, we do have to worry about. So the state really doesn't care if you have $20,000 or $2 million, you have to pay state inheritance tax. Pennsylvania, spouse to spouse, you pay 0%. So spouses are exempt.
Okay.
So if you're married and you pass away, your spouse can inherit all of your assets and not pay any inheritance tax. If you give it to a child or a direct descendant, it's going to be 4.5% to a direct descendant. Once you go to other people like siblings, it goes up to about 12%.
Wow.
And once you go, if you like your neighbor down the street a lot and want to give it to, Joe down the street or somebody like that, it jumps up to, I believe, 15%. So it keeps getting higher as the further you get away from family. So again, there needs to be a strategy in place of who's inheriting that money and what are they going to pay in taxes when they actually get it.
Okay, now if you're sitting down with a client and they come in, they've got a 529, they've got all these other accounts, what's the first thing that you would do to help them get their situation together?
Yeah, so the first thing we want to look at is the titling of the accounts. So we talked about who's the owner, who's the beneficiary. Same thing on the retirement accounts. How are they titled? Do you have an actual beneficiary on there? So, setting up a plan to actually find out how everything is titled and who the beneficial owner is if, God forbid, something happened to the actual owner, that would be the first step, is looking at it. So even before we dig into the weeds about what are the investments and how is it performing and all that stuff, we want to make sure the account's set up the correct way. So that's step one. Then we can check off the other boxes after that.
Okay, great. Now, let's say this isn't set up. And the person just is vehement about setting any of this stuff up. They just want to leave it and walk away.
Yeah.
God forbid something happens.
Yeah.
What are the consequences?
Yeah. So we do have that every once in a while, where a client just says, I don't want to put anybody's name on there. I don't want to set it up. So the state has a plan for you. Okay. So if you don't put a plan in place for yourself,
I've heard of that plan.
The state of Pennsylvania puts a plan in place for you. It's usually not the way you want it to go, because it's a standard boilerplate how the money goes if you pass away without naming beneficiaries, without a will, without anything. The state is going to direct those monies to certain people. Again, most of the time it is not who we would choose to do that before we pass away. So at that point, I would really recommend sitting down with an estate attorney, sitting down with the accountant, sitting down with a financial professional to say, hey, here's the consequences of doing that. If you want help, great, but we try to push them in the right direction, but of course not everybody is going to do it.
Now, if I have a named beneficiary and I have a will, does the will supersede who my beneficiary is?
So it's the opposite. So the beneficiary will supersede the will. So if I leave an account to you, Ron, but I have my wife named in my will, you are actually going to supersede the will. So if I have you as a named beneficiary on the account, it doesn't matter if the will says something different. If I list you as an individual on my account as the beneficiary, you are the one who's going to get that money.
Okay, so the named beneficiary actually receives. So it's very important.
It is.
To make sure who your beneficiaries are.
And that's why it's important as well to get the estate attorney on board as well, because we want to make sure things are matching up.
Right.
We don't want that instance where, if something happens to me, I have you listed, but I have my wife in the will listed, and now there's a huge fight over what's going to happen to the money after I'm not here.
Right.
So getting everybody on the same page and putting that plan in place is going to be a step one.
So in other words, I presume that a part of your annual review is to review the beneficiaries. It seems very important.
Absolutely.
That the beneficiaries are in place.
Absolutely. There's a lot of life events that happen right now with with people passing away, with divorce, with things like that. Stuff changes. Things change consistently. So we need to keep updating that, and that's exactly right. Every year on an annual review is the perfect time to do that, just to run through and say, here's how the accounts are titled, here's who you have as beneficiaries. Does that make sense? Did anything change? Do we need to switch anything around?
So in other words, the beneficiary doesn't have to be written in stone.
That's correct.
I think a lot of people are under the misnomer that I name a beneficiary and it's set for life. So you can change the beneficiary.
Absolutely. As long as you are competent, so as long as you don't have something like Alzheimer's or, you're coerced into making a decision. So as long as you're fully competent, you can change your will and your beneficiaries at any point in time with no problem at all. Okay. So yes, that is not written in stone, and people change beneficiaries for reasons all the time, which is perfectly fine.
Okay, now moving ahead, what are the key points that you would tell everyone regarding RMD 529?
Yeah, so to kind of look at it from a 30,000-foot view, again, what we want to find out is what's most important to a client. So, what are their priorities? What's important to them? Is there certain people that, they specifically want to leave money to or plan a legacy to? And you got to find either a financial professional or somebody that's going to use an established process like I do with my clients to make sure that you're planning for those goals and you're planning for what's important to those clients. And then you have to make sure you partner with them throughout their life because, like we said, things are going to change. Right. So using the accountant, using the attorney, using a financial professional, and keep partnering with them throughout your life changes to make sure that that plan is in place when we need it and when the time comes.
Okay, great. Well, Jake, I'd like to thank you for coming in today and talking about a legacy and 529 and just explaining things in such a thorough manner.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome. This is Ron Williford. Let's Talk Money at Studio 21.